I'm here with Matt Kaplan and Sarah Al-Ahmed. Matt is the current host of Planetary Radio, which is the Planetary Society's podcast. He's stepping down at the end of 2022. Sarah is picking up where he leaves off at the beginning of 2023 as the host of Planetary Society. So since it's the Christmas season, I guess, Matt, that means you're the host of Planetary Society Radio, past and present. And Sarah, you're the host of Planetary Radio, yet to come. So
I'll make sure to wear the long, creepy cloak,
Got to get a skeleton hand to point to things. Yeah.
Well, thank you both for joining me. This is great. I'm really excited to talk to you.
It's a great pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So Matt, let's start with you. You indicated to me, I think, that you actually loved space before you found Star Trek. Is that right?
It's true. It's true.
So how did you find space? How did you find your love of space? And then how did you find Star Trek?
Well, space, probably, I don't even know how, because I was so young. How young was I? I was like maybe a toddler, not much beyond that, because I'm old and I can remember the Mercury launches. I can remember running to the television as a little tiny kid to watch Mercury launches, and was so into it, as a lot of kids were at that time, and building models and reading about space. And I remember telling my mother that I was going to read every book about space in our local public library, which was a little hole in the wall storefront public library, so that wasn't that big a deal. And I did not get that done, but I still love reading about space, and that led in a way to science fiction. Robert Heinlein, one of his juvenile books that a friend of mine turned me on to. And, then watching what science fiction was available on TV, Lost in Space. But then, I remember being so excited because when I was 12 years old, Star Trek premiered, and life was changed.
And what is it about Star Trek that drew you in?
At first, I suppose it was that it painted this technological vision of the future that seemed attractive to, a kid who was wrapped up in spaceships and stuff like that. But, I quickly learned that this was a plausible future and a desirable future universe, and one that I wanted to live in. And like so many people, you go to a Star Trek convention and you see that amazing, diverse group of people, and they all are just thrilled to be there because they want to identify with this future, which is, not always perfectly written and not always, perfectly good, Section 31 and all that, but but still is a place where we want to be. And that of course was Roddenberry's vision. That was what he talked about at the time. That's what he, told me in the couple of times that I got to interview him. And I think, I'm sure he would be very pleased to see that it continues so strongly today.
I will circle back to a couple of the things you mentioned, but first I want to hop on over to Sarah. Same question for you. How did you discover Star Trek? How did you discover space? And were those two things linked or were they separate? Tell me your story.
I mean, very much linked for me. It started long before I was born, really. My mom was a huge Star Trek fan when I was, when I was a kid, and it really inspired her to love space. And she didn't have a really solid science background, but the future that it painted for her, it made her want to teach me and my brother about space as much as possible. And then when she got older, she got into Cosmos, which was something that she shared with me before I was old enough to really, understand what I was watching. And then, of course, Next Generation came out when I was very young, and we watched it together as a family, and it had a huge impact on me. And by the time, Captain Janeway came around, I think a lot of little girls who had, watched the show as a kid, at some point, maybe like my mother, she turned to me and she said, this is a woman who's captaining a spaceship. Never let anybody tell you that you can't do what you want to do. Right. which was, you know, great for me because I loved space with or without Star Trek. I think it might have happened, but by the time I was 6, I was committed. I was like, if I can't be in Starfleet, I'm going to discover other planets. I'm going to become an astrophysicist. I'm going to teach as many people about space as I can. So they were very linked. And to this day, I'm a huge Star Trek nerd. So
Rick, I don't want to say that her being a Trekkie is why we hired Sarah, but it didn't hurt.
Didn't hurt.
Yeah, it's always good to hire a Trekkie.
You know, they do this thing, at least in my interviews, where they kind of give you that question, that little bit of spicy question, which is, you know, Star Trek or Star Wars. And I'm like, that is hard. But I mean, it's definitely Star Trek for me, even though I have been seen cosplaying as a Jedi on occasion.
So Matt, you mentioned that you had talked to Roddenberry a couple of times, and we were talking a little bit about it before we started recording. Tell me about that. How'd you meet him? You know, how'd you get to interview him?
I was very busy at my college radio station, Space and Radio. I always tell people my 2 favorite things outside of family. And I really got my start in our little college radio station at UC Irvine, go Anteaters.
Sure.
And Roddenberry, this was during his dark period between the original series and the release of the motion picture. And people starting to say, hey, why don't we do a Star Trek Next Generation? And he could not sell a pilot. He kept trying. And so really the only way he kept his head above water was he would, you know, it was on the college circuit. He would show the original pilot that, you know, became the, was it Nebula or Hugo winning 2-part show that they opened with, or, you know, Spock basically kidnaps the Enterprise and takes his former captain Pike back to, you know, I don't want to give anything away, but anyway,
55-year-old spoilers here.
Yeah. So he would show that episode, and then he would show a blooper reel, which was pretty funny. And I mean, we didn't have YouTube. And then he'd answer questions, and I got to talk to him backstage for my radio station, and I didn't know what I was doing. He was terrific. I was terrible, so I never share that interview. And then, you know, many years later, I had just arrived not long before at the Planetary Society as a staff member, and the Planetary Society always had a very close relationship with both the Roddenberrys, Majel and Gene. And in fact, he had written a letter on our behalf to encourage people to become members as the society was just getting started. It's really a prized possession of the society. And we were invited, along with some other major donors, some staff, got to visit the set, the bridge set of the Enterprise D. And it was a blast. And by that time, Roddenberry was not in great shape. He was still just wonderful to talk to, but he was, you know, getting near the end. And but it was very touching and wonderful to see him again and know that he had been around to see the comeback of Star Trek, which, you know, we're still enjoying today.
So you've been with the Planetary Society long before Planetary Radio started.
Well, it was about 2 years. I started as a volunteer. I saw that they needed volunteers for one of our big celebrations, Planet Fest celebrations, which are usually tied to some big event. This was going to be the landing of the Mars Polar Lander, which did land, but in little pieces. And we had this big party. So I volunteered, and I ended up running audiovisual for the entire conference with thousands of people. And soon after that, was asked to join the society. I couldn't do it full time because I had a career at Cal State Long Beach, local university. And I stayed there for a long time, but I did go part-time, and I was hired to write content. And what happened was, the woman who hired me, with the permission of our co-founder, Lou Friedman, who's still around, was just on our show a couple of weeks ago to mark the 20th anniversary. She left, she quit. And suddenly I was a webmaster. I didn't know an ounce of HTML. I didn't know.
No.
It was bad timing. It was a tough time, actually, for the society. But I was there for 2 years before I got Lou Friedman and others to say, hey, yeah, we'll let the kid try this Planetary Radio thing. And we started on one radio station 20 years ago, last November. and it became the success that it is. I mean, eventually on over 100 radio stations, podcasting came along, and we embraced that. Over 2.5 million downloads last fiscal year. I am thrilled now, after doing this, to having this weekly deadline hanging over me for 20 years, to hand it off to somebody who's just going to do such a great job with it. And Sarah is going to, do us proud.
Thanks, Matt. It's funny too. I only just, I knew it before, but it only just clicked for me. I was here for 2 years before I took on Planetary Radio, just like you.
There you
It's
go.
wild.
And you got to tell people how we met.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
and it's actually kind of on topic, because we were at the time in the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater at Griffith Observatory here in Los
Wow.
Angeles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I worked there for about 6 years as a show producer and teaching science on the floor to people. And Matt Kaplan was a guest on our show, All Space Considered, which is our monthly, space news show. And so he came to talk about light sail, and I sat in the front row right next to his wife, Adrian. So, and she connected us, and immediately I thought this was the perfect opportunity to ask Matt, how do I get the job at the Planetary Society? How do I go to there? That's the dream. And he had wonderful advice for me, and years later vouched for me when I was applying. And I mean, honestly, Matt totally changed my life.
I went back to the society after that trip, and I said, I met this terrific young woman. We need to steal her from the Griffith. And it took about a year, I think, something like that. But we managed, and of course, you've been our digital community manager. That's what you're moving up from, having gotten that ready to go. Really exciting stuff that's coming for the members of the society. But it's even more full circle, because, Rick, I credit all the time the Griffith Observatory for my love of science, that and another facility that existed in LA. But my parents used to bring me to Griffith Observatory before I could walk. And I've had this long relationship there. And it really generated, probably made me the science geek nerd that I am today. And so, yeah, to find my successor there was just perfect.
That's really cool.
I love that, Matt, that you got to spend time there as a kid, and that it impacted you, because I taught the school field trips for 10-year-olds for maybe about 5 years there. And I always hope that I'll hear later that someone was moved by that experience. And I know it's true, because I hear stories from people like you all these decades later. I wonder how many people have been impacted by that building and the people that work there. It's wild.
Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. There's also that 2-parter in Star Trek Voyager that takes place there. And it's funny, because when I got the job at Griffith, I tried to explain to my partner, like, I got this job at this place I love. And he's like, well, I've never been there. And I'm like, well, let's watch these Star Trek episodes. So his first experience with that building was literally those episodes. And you've got to see the Leonard Nimoy Event Horizon Theater. I mean, it's wild how many theaters and facilities across the United States Leonard Nimoy contributed to. And I mean, it always felt really special to work in that place. And when he passed away, I mean, there was so much love that just, it didn't have a direction to go. And we didn't officially set up a place for people to pay tribute to him. Nevertheless, hundreds of gifts started ringing that theater. People just kept coming to be there just to say goodbye and thank you. And it was a beautiful moment.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's great.
So, Matt, what makes now the right time for you to step away from Planetary after 20 years? Why
Exhaustion.
not go for 40?
It just, I've said a number of times, if you heard the first episode of Planetary Radio and then didn't hear another one until last week's show, you would say, oh yeah, same show. It's changed very little in 20 years. That's really probably not right. It needs new blood. It's getting new blood. And it's also that after 20 years, I mean, I really did the show on my own. And thank God, we have just hired a contract post-production support person who will work on the show with Sarah. Because that kind of deadline, turning out a show like that with new content every week for 20 years, it just got to be a little bit too much. And fortunately, you know, I've been asked by our wonderful COO, the wonderful Jennifer Vaughn, and Bill Nye, our CEO, you've heard of him, to stick around. And we have some new things that I'll be involved with. One of them is our new digital community, now called our member community, which Sarah has put together, which people will be hearing more about early next year. And hopefully, you know, the thing that I will miss, which I hope I don't have to miss, is talking to the heroes that I get to talk to every week, because that's exactly how I think of them. And I don't want to miss that opportunity. And you know, I just yesterday talked to what I think will be my last external guests for Planetary Radio while I am host, Rob Manning, the chief engineer of JPL, and Andy Weir, the author of The Martian and Project Hail Mary.
Yeah.
And I had dreamed of bringing these two guys together because I have done stand-up shtick with them on stage, both of them. And they are brilliant, innovative people and funny as all get out. And sure enough, it was just electric. It was just a critical mass bringing those two guys together, and they knew each other and they had a lot of respect for each other. I can't give that up. I have to, you know, be able to stay in touch with people like this, because it's one of the greatest joys of my life.
So Sarah, you're taking over in 2023. You told me you are interviewing your first special guest today. Who's that going to be?
Well, surprise, surprise, it's Matt Kaplan. I can't not interview him from my first show. There are so many untold stories, so many amazing little secrets and fun things I've heard snippets of from Matt, but I want to know more, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun.
I hope so. I hope so.
Cool. And is that coming out the first week of 2023, or are you taking a week off? Yeah.
Yeah, that will be January 4th, 2023. We're gonna keep going all the way on through. Hopefully, you know, get everything done early enough that we can all still have our nice little holiday before we kick into high gear. But thankfully, you know, as Matt said, I do have some backup, which is fantastic, because I do not know how you did it for 20 years by yourself, Matt. You must have, I don't know, Android brain or something, or I don't know, time machine.
Positronic. Yeah.
Yep.
So, Matt, according to rumor, you never missed a show in 20 years, and you hate reruns. So, so did you really do 20 years worth every week of play? And you had COVID recently, and you still did the show. So
I had a relatively mild case of COVID. I had a relatively mild case of COVID and a relatively mild case of insanity. Not exactly. It's not that every show was 100% new. About once a year, maybe a couple of times, twice in 1 year, I would take a major feature in the show, the main feature, the main interview or whatever, and repeat that. But every other show, 100% new. And even in those shows, we always had new content, because the opening of the show is frequently very timely. We have headlines from our free weekly newsletter, The Downlink, which anybody can see at planetary.org. Thank you, Bill. I hope the check's in the mail.
It's really interesting. If anybody that's watching has not subscribed to it, go pause this and go do that, because
it's great. It's been a tremendous success for us. It's still a fairly recent development for us. And it's just a great way to catch up on what's going on, particularly in space science, planetary science, but there's other stuff in there too, including updates on Planetary Radio. We also have the What's Up segment, which the only other person who has been on every single episode of the show is our chief scientist, my friend Bruce Betts, who does, you know, What's Up in the Night Sky, This Week in Space History, a random space fact, which always has echo behind it, and then our trivia contest. And I'm very happy to know that he'll be continuing that tradition with Sarah.
Sarah, do you have any guests lined up other than Matt that you're looking forward to, or anything you're looking forward to covering that you can talk about?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really excited. Next week, I'm going to be talking to Jeremy Graber, who's the assistant launch director at Kennedy Space Center. So we're going to be talking all about the Artemis 1 launch, which was amazing. Gosh, we have some other guests coming up for a bunch of
Scott
different,
Bolton, right?
Scott Bolton. We're going to be talking
Yeah.
about Juno and a little bit about ESA's JUICE mission and all the research that's going to be done and is being done by the Juno mission on Jupiter's moons. If anybody watching this right now or listening to this hasn't gone and seen those images that Juno has taken of Ganymede, and I mean, it wild, absolutely beautiful stuff. So we'll be talking a bit about that. I've got a guest coming on who's going to be talking all about the Mars microphone on Perseverance. That's really cool because we helped advocate for that. So that one's going to be a little special for me because the person I'm bringing on isn't just a scientist behind the Mars microphone, but started out as a rock star who had such audio expertise that he then got to work on this Mars microphone. So got some fun things coming down the line, and I'm hoping everyone I reach out to will say yes, because I want to have that same experience as you, Matt. I want to talk to all my heroes. This is going to be so much fun.
Is there anybody you wanted to talk to, Matt, that you just weren't able to get, or anybody you missed?
I'll tell you, the biggest regret I had was Carl Sagan, because of course he passed away even before I reached the Planetary Society as a volunteer or a staff person.
Yeah.
I was in the same room with him once when Viking 1 landed on Mars. We were in Von Karman Auditorium, and he was surrounded by major media, the networks and major newspapers, and I was a scruffy college reporter. And it just, as I've told people, would not have been a good use of his time to talk to me and my buddies from KUCI at UC Irvine. But I regret that. And then, as a lot of people regret in our business, I regret that I never got to talk to Neil Armstrong. But Neil, was always reticent about talking to media folks. He was not the recluse that a lot of people thought, but he really just didn't like to have a spotlight on himself. On the other hand, I did get to talk to Buzz a lot. Buzz Aldrin even drove his car once, but and that was fun. Buzz is quite the character.
Do you have a favorite moment in the past that you've covered on Planetary Radio?
Oh man, that's really tough. God, there've been so many. I have a least favorite moment. I know that one's easy to identify.
Share that with me.
Okay. We were doing a live show, Planetary Radio Live, at the National Air and Space Museum in Washington. We had a good-sized audience.
Yeah.
And I made a mistake. I like to bring on something representing the arts that was space relevant. We've done poetry. We had the Space Poetry Jam. We've had musicians. But in this case, I had found a guy who did rap, hip hop stuff that was space related, and brought him on. He was not very good. And we had some older people involved with the show who were my guests that time, who were a little taken aback by the hip hop guy who got up during the break and was rapping about outer space. And it's not, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that he wasn't that great. Don't tell him I said that. But then, so we already had that. And then Bill Nye came off the stage, and he had plugged in his laptop to recharge it. And he went over to our plugs, our little outlet thing, and he unplugged what he thought was his laptop. He unplugged the recorder that was recording the show. And unfortunately, it did not default to battery power. And so that show, it was recording onto a hard drive, and it was corrupted. Yep. And so we stopped for like an hour, half an hour, 45 minutes with the audience there. It was incredibly painful. Bill felt terrible, of course. And it was not able to air the next week. We sent it out to a company that happened to be big fans of Bill Nye and wanted to help rescue the show. It's one of these companies that, retrieves lost data from hard drives. They were able to retrieve the show. And so weeks later, much later than expected, we were able to air the show. But boy, that night, was that ever painful. And, on the other hand, it's probably the live shows like when we celebrated right after the end of the Cassini mission, or when we were on stage at Caltech, when InSight landed on Mars. I mean, you cannot beat those moments for what Bill calls the PB&J, the passion, beauty, and joy of space.
What I'm hearing is that I should label my plugs just in case.
Yeah. And make sure the batteries are going to take over if somebody trips over the cord or something. Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's a good advice. About 6 years ago, Casey Dreyer, who's his title is
Senior Space Policy Advisor and Chief Advocate for the Planetary Society.
There you go. He came to you and said he wanted to do a monthly space advocacy episode of Planetary Radio. This is sort of a question both of you can weigh in here. What's so important? First of all, for anybody that doesn't know, what is space advocacy? And for the next part of the question is, what makes it so important? How is space advocacy going to ensure a Star Trek future? Why is it important for us to do?
Sarah, you want to go first?
Oh, sure. I mean, basically, you're always going to get to people more effectively if you're having personal conversations with them. So space advocacy is all about reaching out to government entities or anyone in power that can influence whether or not space missions are funded or how they're shaped, so that you can have personal conversations with them to try to make sure they get the funding or get the green light that they need. Which can happen in a few ways. It could be as little as giving a call or signing a petition, but the most effective way is direct communication, either through, video calls like this, or most effective, literally going to your government agencies, going into their offices, setting up meetings and having conversations with them, which I understand can be really daunting. So to make that a little easier, every year we have a space advocacy event called our Day of Action. And we will actually set up these meetings for people. It's easiest for us with the United States government because we have, a deep connection with them and NASA. But we also try to provide opportunities for people in other countries to advocate for space missions. It's a little more difficult for us because every country, every space agency is different, but we're hoping we can continue to expand it because these are the things that really make a difference. If we want Star Trek to be real, people have to say that they care about these space missions. So, don't be afraid to talk about what you care about. And if it's space, we'll help you do that. But it's also a good stepping stone to make people feel empowered so that they have the tools they need to advocate for other things that really matter to them. So I'm really happy we do this. I think it's, not the most important thing that we do, but at least in the top two,
Yeah, I agree
huge
with that.
Difference.
Yeah. And this is partly why the Planetary Society came into existence in 1980. Our founders, Carl Sagan, Lou Friedman, and Bruce Murray, who had been the director of JPL, they saw that, the public was very interested in planetary science. They loved seeing these little robotic emissaries of humanity go across the solar system, but it wasn't getting funded. A lot of money was going to Space Shuttle at that point. And so they said, we need a grassroots organization that's going to help people understand how important this stuff is and how we can get people in Congress to understand that this is really something that's worth supporting. And, I think we've been very successful since then, and still are. You look at just 2 days ago, as we speak, NASA announced that they have set a launch target for the NEO Surveyor mission. Near Earth Object Surveyor mission, which is run by a good friend of the Society named Amy Meinzer at the University of Arizona, used to be at JPL. This is an infrared space telescope, which is desperately needed. You talk to anybody in planetary defense who wants to make sure that we don't suffer the fate of the dinosaurs, that we see the rock coming and have time to deflect it. We need an infrared space telescope. And that's what NEO Surveyor, which is that had its ups and downs for many, many years. We have been lobbying, or I should say advocating for that for years and years and years. And you've just seen bipartisan support for this mission come from Congress, and NASA has said, okay, we're going with it. And we're thrilled. And that brings up another great point. Space is bipartisan. Space exploration is bipartisan. I mean, there aren't very many areas nowadays where you can get Democrats and Republicans in the room together and say, yeah, this is something we all want to go for. And I think, if nothing else, ignoring the many other benefits of space exploration here on Earth, just the fact that it's able to be a bridge between these two sides of our very much stratified, very much isolated societies is pretty much a valuable thing.
And you were looking for somebody, the Planetary Society is looking for somebody to partially fill that role in Washington. Is that correct? Have you found somebody? Are you still looking?
As far as I know, Sarah, do you know? I think the search is still
I
underway.
believe the search is still underway. I talked with Casey Dreyer about it maybe a week or so ago. There are some good candidates, but if there's anybody out there who wants to be there in DC helping us do this advocacy work, now would be the time to apply, because I mean, honestly, you can make a huge difference. And who even knows what the future is going to be like because of the advocacy work that this person and all of our members and supporters around the world have committed to. It's absolutely stunning. When I was brought on to the Planetary Society, I knew that advocacy was important, but every time someone tells me a story of some mission we helped get funded, or some spacecraft we saved, or some mystery we helped solve, it's absolutely bonkers what it accomplishes. And happily, it's easy to do the advocacy work because everybody loves space. Everybody loves space. It brings together, people of different political views and nations around the world. It's phenomenal. So hopefully we get a good person for that role. I'm excited to meet them.
So if anybody wants to apply, where do they go?
You would want to go to planetary.org/careers.
Okay.
The posting is up there.
Great.
I love giving these examples. New Horizons, Alan Stern, the guy behind that tremendously successful mission to Pluto and now beyond, exploring the Kuiper Belt. He gives much credit to the Planetary Society as the New Horizons mission struggled to find funding for a decade or so. And it's very possible that mission also might not have happened had not have been for the support of the society and its members.
And I think about what happened, with the Pioneer anomaly. We had no idea what was going on with that. They weren't, NASA wasn't really committed to solving it. We rallied people and we got that figured out. Or when Hubble's, Hubble's images were a little blurry, and it was going to take some major, fixing to make that telescope work. We had to rally people to advocate to get that done. But I tell you, Hubble's still up there.
You mentioned earlier that Bruce Betts, who's your chief scientist, does a number of things on the show, including trivia. I don't know if you know this, but when I was originally brought on to DSTN, I was brought on as the history and trivia writer.
Did not know that.
A year later, the creator of the podcast decided to move on, and she asked me if I'd take over, and that's how I got to where I am today. So in that spirit, I have prepared a little trivia contest. NASA sent a DART mission up into space, and what DART does is it basically hit an asteroid. We wanted to see if we could move it in case one was coming toward the Earth to hit us and extinguish us like it did the dinosaurs. So it was just a test to see if we could move this object. There's a Star Trek original series episode where they do that, where they try to move an asteroid in a similar way. They use their deflector shields instead of a missile. What was that episode?
Okay, so actually, there was also you're talking about a Next Generation episode, I think?
I'm talking about an original series episode.
Oh, original series. Then I know the one. I'm not going to remember the name of the episode, but Captain Kirk has his brain wiped by a device that gives him the ability to control a system which has been put in place by some advanced aliens to protect this planet whenever an asteroid comes their way. And sure enough, he falls in love. In fact, he marries an indigenous person, and then they get stoned at the end, I think, and she dies, and it's horrible. And of course, he's rescued by Spock. But it was a wonderful episode. But if you want the title, I'm out of luck.
I will give it to you. The title is The Paradise Syndrome.
Thank you. Okay.
1 point for Matt.
This is an unfair advantage with TOS because I was alive and watching. So
That's
Well,
true. I was very small when I
Sarah
last
wasn't
There
on
you
Earth
go.
yet. Yeah.
Well, the next one, maybe more up your alley. I'm not sure, Sarah. So the Planetary Society in 2019 sent Light Sail 2 into the cosmos. It recently returned to Earth and basically burned up in the atmosphere. Light Sail 2 was a solar sailor. There have been a couple solar sailors in Star Trek, but there is one episode called Explorers of Star Trek Deep Space Nine, where Sisko and his son Jake, Sisko builds this replica of a solar sailor, and then he and Jake go out exploring the cosmos in this. What were they trying to prove by going out in this solar sailor?
Man, I mean, in my brain, the way I remember it was basically that Sisko and his son should bond more is really what I think he was trying to prove. But but the solar sailor itself, I don't know. I don't remember.
I don't have the full answer,
Okay.
but Sisko wanted to prove that the Bajorans could have made it from Bajor to another world, I think, in their solar system, using solar sailing, much like the old book from the 1950s, Kon-Tiki. Thor Heyerdahl, who made like a Polynesian boat and showed that Polynesians could have populated the Pacific Ocean, even with their, I won't say primitive navigation abilities. They weren't primitive at all. Am I close? I think
you are very close. You're spot on. They were trying to get to Cardassia.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
100 years ago, some Bajorans supposedly left Bajor and the solar sailor for Cardassia. The Cardassians didn't want people to know this. They had actually dug up the solar sailor on their world, but they didn't want the Bajorans to know that it had happened. So Sisko and Jake went and proved that it could happen. And suddenly the Bajorans or the Cardassians were like, "Oh yeah, by the way, we found the solar sailor here on our planet."
What I don't remember is why any Bajoran would have wanted to go to Cardassia, but okay.
Yeah, well, I don't actually think that was ever explored in the episode. I don't remember that either.
Big mistake.
Right. There was also that solar sail in Strange New Worlds recently, which I thought was fantastic. And I put a side by side of the two images of like Light Sail 2 and that solar sail together and put it up on our Twitter a few months back. People loved it.
Mars figures into a lot of the Star Trek series. Utopia Planitia is where the Enterprise was built for Next Generation. We saw an attack on Mars in Star Trek Picard. We're setting our sights on Mars now as a human race, trying to get out there and colonize Mars. The first time we saw the actual surface of Mars was in Star Trek Enterprise. It was almost the last episode of Star Trek Enterprise, and they went to the surface. We saw the Mars rover was out of commission, but was there with a plaque next to it. And the plaque, in part, read Mars Heritage Site, first rover on Mars, July 4, 1997. But it also had a quote inscribed in it. What was that quote?
A quote inscribed on it. I'm trying to remember if it was a Carl Sagan quote.
You're on the right track.
I remember, but oh my goodness, it's been so long since I've seen Enterprise. I remember recording it on VHS, so it's in my home somewhere. I guess I'll take a hint, but I might have hinted myself.
You did. It was a Carl Sagan quote.
Yeah.
It's, I believe, the quote, he recorded it for the Golden Record.
Oh no. Oh gosh, there's so many good ones it could be.
And you know what? I know the quote, but I don't remember it. It's a greeting to future explorers about, whatever has brought you here, we wish you the joy of discovery. Am I close? Is it that one?
But the quote was, "Whatever the reason you're on Mars, I'm glad you're there, and I wish I was with you."
You know, it came up again just recently in something that we were doing, and I just couldn't quite place it. But yeah, isn't that great? That's our founder, one of them.
Right. I can't wait until like hundreds of years from now, people are, we have Planetary Society reunions at the, Carl Sagan Memorial Station.
Here's some trivia about that. I watched that on Enterprise and I went nuts. And I wrote to my friend Andre Bermanis, who was working on Enterprise, one of the producers, started as a science advisor on Trek. I said, that was just the most wonderful tribute. And then I asked Ann Druyan if she had heard about it. And I think she said, yes, she had been told that it was going to be coming up. But it was just, to see that little thing, it had a little like a rope around it, what am I trying to say?
Those little
on
stanchions.
Yeah, exactly. And they're placed by the Mars Historical Society. It was perfect.
Which is amazing, right? Just for anybody who's watching who doesn't know, who's Ann Druyan?
Oh, Ann Druyan, of course, the longtime professional and life partner of Carl Sagan. They basically shared everything together, and her brainwaves are on the golden record on the Voyager spacecraft. And it was recorded the day after they declared their love for each other. And so those were some brainwaves. She's brilliant. She has continued Cosmos, huge fan of and supporter of the Planetary Society, largely responsible for us being in the solar sail business.
Yeah, and you've had her on the show a number of times, I believe. Yeah,
many times. We just had her on to celebrate Carl's birthday. Some people call it Sagan Day. Just in the recent weeks, a wonderful interview. She is just, I'll tell you what Neil deGrasse Tyson told me once. We were talking about how amazingly articulate and passionate and just listening to Ann is just such a wonderful experience. And Neil said, you know what, when Ann gets into it, I just feel like I want to sit down on the floor, cross my legs, and look up at her and listen. And I said, I know exactly what you mean. And, she shared that with Carl.
In Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, Captain Claw, we're introduced to Captain Claw, who's this Klingon. And he's doing target practice on some space debris. The space debris was actually an actual probe that went out that left Earth. And so do you remember what it was that Captain Claw destroyed?
God, I'd completely forgotten. I mean, I've seen all the movies, of course, but I just can't remember. I would have to take a wild guess and say Voyager. One of the Voyagers before it became V'ger.
Yeah, or maybe one of the Pioneers.
Yeah. Oh, man. No, I'm sorry. I don't remember.
What were you saying, Sarah?
I was going to say it might be one of the Pioneers.
Keep going.
Oh, no. Which of them?
It was launched in March 1972.
Oh, no.
Okay.
Yep, I'm not going to remember which one it is.
It was Pioneer 10.
We humans have put 5 of our robot emissaries into interstellar space, or they will reach it when New Horizons gets there. Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11, Voyager 1, Voyager 2, and now New Horizons will be there. But Voyager 1 and 2 still talking to us from 22 light hours away.
Yeah,
it's just the most amazing thing.
Incredible. And nobody predicted that, right? Like they thought it'd be over.
No one thought that they would still be talking to us after 45 plus years.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Can I share one prop that
absolutely, please.
Because it's one of my prized possessions among all of my Star Trek paraphernalia.
Yeah. Oh, music from outer space.
One of my first albums.
Play it?
I bought it as a kid. Sorry about playing it.
Do you still have a record player that you play?
Oh, yeah. I have a turntable partly just to be able to play my old vinyl like this.
Yeah.
And I bought it as a kid as soon as Nimoy, put out the record, and he does sing on it. And I don't think it's terrible. Certainly no worse than Shatner.
You call that singing, do you?
Yeah, and it does have you know, the actual original theme, you know, the da 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 da, that is a whole song, which a lot of people don't realize.
Yeah.
It actually went into the other TOS theme, and hey, you know, what can I say? Live long and prosper.
And what's your badge, Sarah? You're wearing a badge, right?
Yeah, I got this for myself on my 1 year anniversary of working at Griffith Observatory because I'd been in that Leonard Nimoy theater for so long. And I got it at Comic-Con, so I had to get my next generation badge.
That's amazing. It's really cool. Is it magnets or is it a pin?
Yeah, it's magnetic, so there's a thing on the back, but it doesn't actually work. One of these days I'll have to get one of those nice Bluetooth ones.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. This has been a real delight, and I can't wait to see what you're going to do with Planetary Radio in the future, Sarah. I'm really excited. And Matt, you will be missed, but I'm glad you're still going to be around the Planetary Society, and we'll hear your voice from time to time, I'm sure. So
Absolutely.
Hope so. Thank you, Rick. This has been great. Really fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thanks so much. Have a great day, guys.
You too.
You too. Thanks.
Bye.